Oil for the lamps of Britain. An historic moment as the tanker Theogenitor moves in to unload the first cargo of oil from Britain's own North Sea Argyle fields. Energy Minister Anthony Wedgwood Benn comes aboard to start the precious cargo flowing.
Now that was a time for national rejoicing. North Sea oil came on tap, on time.
You might call it bottled gold.
A time of high hopes and a few niggling doubts.
We've been told again and again that it means millions and billions of pounds for this country.
Her Majesty the Queen comes to Dice near Aberdeen to start Britain's first flow of oil on its way south to the Grangemouth refinery.
Enough money at least to buy up every home in Britain.
So, at last, British oil, after tremendous hardships, after great physical and financial courage, is in business.
Are we going to see any of it? Are we, or some mysterious they, really going to be rich?
Well, in fact, these days you're very lucky if you can say you're better off now than you were a year ago, despite that heady feeling of riches to come that we felt when North Sea oil came on stream. But that's very different from the 50s and 60s and the early 70s, when politicians seemed to promise a perpetual Christmas in which we'd become richer and richer and enjoy an ever-rising standard of living. And it happened. It happened because the country's capacity to produce goods and services regularly expanded, the process of economic growth. For example, in 1950, the Christmas tree presented us with 3.1% more goods and services. In 1960, a particularly high growth rate of 4.7%. 10 years on, and there's still more on the tree, a 2.2% growth rate. Britain's average growth rate of about 2.5% a year was sufficient to allow a doubling of living standards every 20 years or so. In 1955, 1 in 9 families owned a fridge. By 1964, 1 in 3. And by 1971, 7 in 10. From 1950 to 1964, the number of television sets we owned went up from under 500,000 to almost 13 million. The washing machine suddenly became a possibility for millions. In 5 years, 1955 to 60, the numbers doubled from 1 in 6 households to 1 in 3. And, of course, the Sunday outing in the car was no longer just a rich man's privilege. More cars, telephones, hospital beds and schools. To use one of the favourite clichés of economists, the national cake was growing larger and larger. Between 1950 to 1960, the cumulative growth was 29%. The next 10 years produced a cake 69% bigger than the original one, and by 1980, it was 110% bigger. Broadly, economic growth can be seen as resulting from 3 main factors. First, it depended on the availability of the chief ingredients. The quality and quantity of natural resources, called by economists land, labour of all kinds, and capital equipment, like factories and machines. Second, there's the mixing. The same ingredients combined more efficiently can lead to higher productivity, greater output per worker. And thirdly, for most of the post-war period, governments added their own yeast to help the cake rise. By maintaining a high level of demand in the economy to ensure that land, labour and capital were all fully employed. The day we first struck oil, a happy increase in our natural resources. The headline writers made the most of what seemed a marvellous chance to grow still richer. There was enough to make us self-sufficient for decades, and the politicians hoped it would avoid the need for stepping on the economic brakes because of our recurring balance of payments difficulties, that Britain need no longer hover near debt every time we took an expansionist route. There was, too, excitement over the new technology that would be needed, creating new opportunities for industry.
We are going to be a force to be reckoned with in technology, in our industry, particularly in underwater technology, in years to come. We have a slightly more repressive system, perhaps, for entrepreneurial business than America has, which slows us down. But in the oil business, it's perhaps a freer business, and it brings to the top more entrepreneurs, I think, than any other area of industry.
There was work for thousands willing to work on the oil rigs. Well paid, freely spending. For them it was a bonanza.
There are brave men from Shetland right down to Dundee who are working on rigs bringing oil from the sea. For a week on the rigs they get money galore to buy what they need and a bloody side more.
So what was the impact on the centre of the new activity, Aberdeen? Well, first, an influx of American oil men and their families.
This morning was for us to get acquainted. So I would like at this time for each of us to introduce ourselves and to tell where we came from.
My name is Karen Word from Houston. I'd like to know what I need to do to get a British driver's license.
My first advice, Karen, would be to take driver's
Even for the Americans, living in a boomtown posed its problems.
We do get a cost of living from Steve's company, and that's really what helps us. If we didn't have that, I don't think that we could live over here. We'd be losing money by coming over here.
It is difficult when we move into a place like this, a boom town, as it were, to adapt to the high cost. And I really don't see how the Scottish people living in this boom town can survive.
In a boom and bust situation, you've got competition from people who simply could not care what they pay for a house as long as they get it. One of the effects is on young married people, where the housing boom has shot prices up to an unbelievable limit. And of course they're denied the possibility of getting a house in the city.
Well, it's cold and it's wet, but your shift's nearly through. Some other poor rigger takes over from you. You'll go down below and you'll sleep bloody well. In another 12 hours you'll be back there in hell. In another 12 hours you'll be back there in hell.
And more generally, what would be the benefits to the British people as a whole? Well, that depended, first of all, on how big a share the government could command of the North Sea wealth through taxation of various kinds. This was a matter for delicate calculation, because they had to beware of killing the golden goose. An oil magnate proudly surveying his North Sea empire. His major oil field, JR, is in full production, and in a new block he's already struck oil which now awaits development. He's very pleased with the way things are going in JR. He's already staked a large sum in exploration and development costs, and on top of that it costs him another 4 chips in running costs per barrel of oil. So his average cost per barrel totaled 20. The price of oil being what it is, he gets back for that stake some 40 chips per barrel income. But now the government demands a share of the company's earnings, and the taxman takes a slice, say 10 chips. The company is not pleased, but its operations continue as before, even when the taxman takes another 5 chips. That's because what the government is siphoning off is economic rent, earning in excess of what's needed to keep resources in their present use. But see what happens if the taxman gets too greedy, if he takes another 6 chips. Now, the company's income per barrel after tax is only 19 chips, and its average costs are 20. At this point, the company takes a major decision. It had been just about to make a further large stake in developing its new block. Now, it decides not to, because it can see that income after tax is not going to be enough to cover its expected costs per barrel.
Jake, JR here. Stop all future developments.
Of course, if the government isn't concerned about future production, it can tax the company still further. Since development costs have already been incurred and there's nothing the company can do about them, production will be maintained at its present level despite further taxation until income after tax falls below the running costs of the JR field. At this point, where income is only 3 and running costs are 4, a further decision is taken. It no longer pays even to keep JR in operation.
Jake, JR again. Think they're going from bad to worse. Cancel all current productions.
So, in taxing oil companies, there are 2 flashpoints that government must watch. A very high level of tax would lead to a shutdown of present production. But because governments are concerned about future production, the more relevant tax level to avoid is that at which companies decide not to invest more in further development.
Well, there are certain other factors. These fields are going to be technically difficult to develop, and this is where I think we have a slight difference of opinion with the government. We see these as being very high-risk fields, and we've got to get the balance of the rewards against the very high risk has got to be right, and we don't see it right at the moment.
So how far has this process gone already? What fields are not being developed that could be developed?
In the last few weeks, there have been several oil fields postponed or cancelled. For example, there's the large Phillips so-called T block, which is 3 oil fields. There's been a Shell development called the Tern. There's been a BP development called Andrew. In total, these fields would have required something over £2 billion worth of investment, and these have been deferred under the present tax regime.
The oil companies, as might be expected, are currently arguing that the flashpoint has now been reached when future exploitation of the North Sea is threatened by too high a level of taxes. Apart from the size of the tax haul, the other main issue was how should the tax have been used? By the mid-70s, the debate was ranging at the highest level in the Cabinet, Parliament, and of course the inevitable Frost Special, with confrontation between the leading politicians of the day.
And what we're saying is we want to channel this money partly to give us a powerful manufacturing base to sustain our living standards, partly to provide alternative energy when the oil runs out, and partly to provide for essential infrastructure, as it's called, and public services, so that the benefit doesn't just come to us in tax reliefs where you give it all away. We've got to think of our children and our grandchildren, and I think that's the way most people in Britain are going to look at it.
Give the people's money back to them in less tax, in order that they, as consumers, can lead industry to making and providing the goods and services that the world will buy. And the government's very bad at identifying goods and services that the world will buy. It's not their job. They're not good at it. Besides, the people in this country need the incentive of a less tax take from their earnings, from the top management down to the shop floor worker. They're all overtaxed in personal terms. And that's why I think the lion's share of anything that does emerge, and one mustn't exaggerate it, should go back to the people.
Mr. Benn arguing that the state should be responsible for funneling the oil wealth into more and better public services and for identifying new industries to be established and encouraged. Sir Keith Joseph said that the job would be better done by the private sector, stimulated by tax cuts. But regardless of how it was to be done, there was a more basic question of jam today or jam tomorrow. The classic economic choice between consumption and investment for the future. Should the oil benefits be enjoyed immediately, making everyone better off now, or should the revenues be ploughed back into industries which would maintain rising living standards even after the oil had run out? A bigger cake now, or an even bigger cake later? In the event, we don't seem to have had either.
Well, I haven't seen any money from the oil around here.
The benefit should be for the people. That's what it should be. Probably it's gone to these big industrialists and people like that. Probably it's just evaporated that way, but it certainly doesn't seem to come floating down to the common man in the street.
Well, BP shares have been sold off. Our heritage has been also sold off for a temporary profit. I think that it's gone essentially to prop up unemployment and the non-productive elements of the public sector.
So why have we been disappointed? Well, because the major gush of revenues from the North Sea has coincided with a period of intense recession in the economy. This is partly due to world factors, but much of it stems from the growing belief by British governments, particularly in the late 70s and early 80s, that they were using too much yeast in the baking of the national cake. That is, that their efforts to keep demand at a high level was causing inflation rather than real growth. The oil slice is still there, though of a smaller size cake, and that's why we don't feel better off as a result of oil, because overall we're not better off. But that's not to say that oil hasn't had a major impact on the economy. There are two main ways in which its influence has been felt. First, the balance of payments. At one time, nearly 12% of British exports were needed to pay for our oil imports. Now, on balance, we're not only self-sufficient, we actually export oil. And second, government tax revenues are rolling in very large amounts. 6.4 billion in 1981-2, expected to rise to 8 billion in 1984-85. So how are they being used? Have they gone into higher state spending on more and better public services and new industries, as proposed by Mr. Benn? Well, no. Since the latter part of the 70s, governments have been strenuously trying to hold back or actually cut the public sector. So, have they enabled reductions to be made in other taxes, as Sir Keith Joseph was advocating? Well, no. Some taxes have been cut, but others have been increased. The total hasn't changed much. So where are the missing billions? Well, remember that this has been a period of rapidly rising unemployment, which has meant a massive outlay by governments on unemployment and supplementary benefits, redundancy payments and the like. The fact is that without oil, governments committed to balancing the books would have had to have cut other types of spending even further, or raised taxes. The fact is that the oil revenues have been largely dissipated in paying the price of bringing down inflation at all costs. A strange story, like this one, which has got everything: Cinderella and the Seven Dwarfs in Wonderland.
Ho, hey ho, it's off to work we go, sang Cinderella and the Seven Dwarfs as they happily bustled about, making and selling things to one another in their arcade of 8 little shops, all of which were very pretty, especially Cinderella's, which was straight out of a fairy tale. And they were even happier when one day they discovered a buried crock of gold that promised to make them all much richer. They argued a lot amongst themselves about how it should be used. Some said they should improve their shops and tools to make better things after the crock ran dry. Some, like Greedy, argued that life was short and that they should enjoy themselves by living it up a bit. Greedy won the day. Then, on the 79th of March, there was a great gale which damaged all the shops a little and Cinderella's quite a lot. Her fairy tale roof blew off and ruined her stock of things to sell and the tools of her trade. Cinderella was unhappy. She could no longer make and sell things like the dwarfs could. She had nothing to do all day, and now she was poorer than she'd been before they discovered a crock of gold. And the dwarfs were not so well off either, having to use the gold from the crock to give Cinderella enough to feed herself. So she wished, and she wished, that she could be busy and happy again. Until, as you may have guessed, a beautiful fairy godmother appeared. "Fairy godmother," she cried, "tonight all the dwarfs are going to the shopkeeper's ball. I can't go as I'm no longer a shopkeeper. Won't you make Prince Charming appear to build me a new shop so that I can go to the ball too?" "No, my child," replied the godmother gravely. "That only happens in fairy stories and pantomimes. It would only be a fairy tale shop, and look what happened to your last one." "So what can I do?" asked Cinderella miserably. "Well," said the fairy godmother, "it's up to the dwarfs. If they do well, they may build you a new shop, which you can work in." And so they lived unhappily in Wonderland. The dwarfs wondered why they were expected to make sacrifices, when, so they said, it wasn't their fault that Cinderella was poor. Some wondered why they were worse off, despite the crock of gold, and whether it might have been better if they'd never found it. And Cinderella wondered why a fairy godmother couldn't build a real shop if she wanted to.